Welcome to the Essential Substance Abuse Skills webinar series. I'm Kate Trans, and today we've invited Matt Axio to speak on professional readiness, attitudes, and values. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center, or ATTC. We're one of 4 national focus centers serving the network, which also includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. To learn more, please visit our website. The series is designed to be a broad overview to assist in preparing for written alcohol and drug certification examinations, to enhance existing knowledge, and to improve overall competence and treatment outcomes. Please be aware that this series is not meant to stand alone, and previous education and training is necessary in order to pass alcohol and drug certification exams. Please check out our other upcoming webinars in this series, as well as our American Indian and Alaska Native Behavioral Health series, which takes place on the first Wednesday of each month. We always welcome suggestions or topics for speakers, so feel free to make suggestions in either the Q&A pod or by contacting me in the email address or phone number provided on this slide. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and CEHs are available upon request for a $15 fee. A request form is available for download in the Files pod in the webinar screen, and I will also be sending this form in a follow-up email to all who attended. Immediately following today's webinar, you'll be redirected to our GPRA evaluation. GPRA stands for the Government Performance and Results Act, and SAMHSA asks us to evaluate our events in order to comply with this act and provide improved performance assessment and accountability. This survey asks about your satisfaction with the event and will take less than 10 minutes to complete. We thank you in advance for helping us to improve our programs. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar, so if you have questions about the presentation or about the Adobe Connect system, please use the Q&A pod by typing them in the field at the bottom. We will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. We would also like you to be aware that this webinar records participant attention time. If you minimize the webinar or are working in another window, the system will record your participation as inactive, which may be reflected in the number of CEHs received. Today's speaker is Matt Ignacio. Matt is currently working for us at the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC as a senior behavioral health consultant and is heading up the task force for creating a new curriculum for non-Native providers who are working with LGBT and Two-Spirit clients in treatment. He also will be beginning a PhD program at the University of Washington School of Social Work this fall, and has recently worked for the National Native American AIDS Prevention Center. His experience is, it comes largely from working in group therapy or individual psychotherapy sessions with HIV-positive clients and facilitating psychoeducational and supportive group counseling. So we're thrilled to have Matt with us here. He's an excellent teacher, and greatly looking forward to hearing from him today. So I'll pass things over to you at this time, Matt.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Please let me know if the volume on my microphone needs to be adjusted. I am working remotely from currently in San Diego, California. So a warm welcome from the sunny, warm, beachy weather of Southern California. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk just generally about attitudes and values and some of the strategies it takes to do our job effectively. And I kind of just want to briefly talk about the value systems that we use, think about some cultural considerations, a conversation on building trust, and because most of my experience and training, and I forgot to mention that I'm a member of the Taona'ato Nation. Most of my work experience has been working with tribal communities, native communities, urban native communities, tribal health departments, state health departments, all working towards improving and increasing access of the health and wellness of Native people. So I like to talk about some steps to engage Native populations. We'll briefly chat about supervision, and then we'll look at some stress and stress management. So all in all, thank you for being here this morning. My microphone is a little too loud, I'm being told, so I'm if it's too loud or too quiet. Okay. So.
That sounds great. Thanks, Matt.
So I want to just generally ask for you to think about what are the standards of care that guide your work, the work that you're doing in your community currently. Certainly we ask of ourselves, where is my knowledge and skills best being used? Oftentimes we ask, am I getting the support I need to help the people we are serving? And do my individual practice and standards values, so our personal beliefs, do they conflict with the organization's expectations? Sometimes you run into that when we work with, say, folks who inject drugs. Now that might go against our personal belief around clients' rights and drug user health and respect, but you know, that's a question that we may be asking of ourselves depending on where we work. Standards may also be set by the organizations in which we work. So again, we may ask ourselves, what is the overall agency mission and goals? And whose needs are being met? Our needs as an organization or the client's needs? I have ran into this particular dilemma when I've worked at organizations that are 9 to 5, clinics, community-based clinics that are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and we miss segments of the population who work during those times and can't come in for appointments. That's a challenge, right? So whose needs are being met? Ours as an organization or the community we are serving? And you know, the always ongoing question is, how can we improve our services to meet the client's needs? And that's what brings us all together here today. So additionally, or furthermore rather, our standards can certainly be set by our profession. For example, social work code of ethics, it basically articulates the basic values, principles, and standards to which we do our work as social workers. And so, generally speaking, all of us certainly have a commitment to clients. We want to promote the well-being of our clients, and in general, the client's interests and health and wellness is a primary concern, right? We certainly work through the value of self-determination. We definitely respect and promote the right of our clients to make decisions for their own lives. And we try to educate and train clients and show clients and role model and model for clients how that's done, particularly to our vulnerable who have limited experience advocating for their own lives. And we are very clear about cultural diversity and social diversity. We work to understand the nature of social diversity and oppression with respect to race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, etc. And these are not just buzzwords, but these are things that we put into action day in and day out. So moving further along the line, I want to describe culture. The word culture very much describes the integrated pattern of human behaviors, which may include the thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. Many of us come from multiple cultures or multicultural backgrounds, so we may identify with our profession and our title at an organization, which may have a culture of its own. For example, nurses, the nursing profession. We may identify from a particular racial ethnic group, such as African American, Native American, Caucasian. We may identify with the culture of within our sexual orientation, whether that be heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. And I know that there are many other roles out there that and cultures we identify, such as provider, caregiver, mother, parent, etc., etc. And those all, in my opinion, fall within the definition of a culture. Looking at Native-specific cultural risk factors, as culture can play into the work that we do, there are some things to keep in mind, or rather I should say, there are things that I keep in mind when I'm working with any Native client or population. These are the things that first come to mind as I'm creating a warm, welcoming environment, as I'm trying to build trust, as I'm trying to engage the client that I'm working with, and that's understanding that there are a lack of confidentiality in the communities that Native people come from. Whether it's real or perceived, there's an issue of trust or more specifically, a lack of trust as providers. We represent institutions that historically were to be distrusted. So there is this trust issue that's in the room, I think. You know, for communities that come from small, rural, reservation-based locations, there is a lack of social services in those communities. So being mindful of that. Understanding that folks may have had a limited access to comprehensive health care. Understanding the role circular migration can play in with regard to our clients. And that is, you know, coming from a small rural community where family is located and then moving to a large urban community where there is employment, where there's opportunities for education, where there's opportunities for romance, where there's opportunities for drug use. And so the circular migration pattern, so someone that goes back and forth between their homeland or their original community where they were from to maybe a larger urban area where they can access particular opportunities, and return home when maybe there's a death in the family or they need to take care of a loved one, and then return back to the city for work. I mean, so this circular migration pattern. And taking into account unresolved traumas, whether it be historical or otherwise. Most of us are familiar with the history of Native people in relationship to the U.S. federal government and to colonization, and that can play out in many, many ways today. So being mindful of that. And also understanding that we work in, I think right now currently we're seeing, if you just turn on the news or article in the paper, the issues of race, the issues around homophobia, transphobia. Transphobia is defined as the fear of transgender individuals, and biphobia, the fear of folks who identify as bisexual. And so all these sort of are coming into play, and they're at the forefront of at least what I would be mindful of when working with folks. So I want to ask you all, rhetorically, or, yeah, is that the right word of the use of that word? I want to ask you to think about, rather, what comes to mind when you think of cultural competency? Many of you have sat in and participated in, through your agency-sponsored trainings that have been titled Cultural Competency. And the overall goal is to increase your competency in working with populations that are underrepresented. Well, I'd like to challenge that and actually ask to reframe that as looking at it from a cultural humility perspective. Humility. And that is defined as cultural humility incorporates a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and critique. Okay? Its aim is to redress the power imbalances in the physician-patient dynamic, and to develop mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic partnerships with communities on behalf of individuals. So really what this is saying is that A, you will never be competent in someone else's culture. That B, it requires lifelong learning and being open to learning. And C, of the power imbalances that can occur between you as a provider and the people you serve. And I guess C also, that we don't know communities as a whole. We can only begin to understand communities individually and the people we come in contact with. But I want to highlight the part about the power imbalances. How many of you have ever gone to a doctor's appointment or what have you? Maybe not even a doctor's appointment. Some appointment where someone comes in with authority, wearing the white coat, very minimal interaction, and just sort of treats you as a number. You're filtered in, you're filtered out, and you're not really taken at, you're really taken at face value, and your whole life isn't really being considered. You're just another chart in the file. Cultural humility works to address that it's important for us to consider the idea that we are not any smarter or better than our clients, that this is equal partnership in one's journey in health and wellness, and we can help facilitate that process. And so cultural humility actually arose out of the nursing profession. And there's a citation there. You can Google cultural humility and learn more about that. So again, like I said, you'll never become truly competent in someone else's culture. Requires simultaneous process of ongoing self-reflection, and again works to redress those power imbalances. So given that, looking at the sheer diversity of Native communities, as you can see, there's quite a variety and not a lot of overlap. So it would be not only unethical, but it would be impossible really to describe all the Native identities and communities and spiritualities and practices and belief traditions and customs. But I think if we frame it in the spirit of we're open to learning, we're open to understanding, and that we are okay with when we make mistakes and might say the wrong things or might be inappropriate at times, as long as we're able to reflect on that and learn and grow, we're all good. Everything's, we're good in the hood, as they say. So I want to talk about building trust. That is such a key component to the work we do, particularly when you're working with Native peoples. I consider it the cornerstone for all the communities we work with. Why would you want to share your most intimate, deepest, darkest behaviors, whether it be your sexual life, your romantic life, your drug-using life? Why would you want to disclose that information with a complete stranger, right? There has to be trust involved. So certainly we work from a non-judgmental perspective. There is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. We're setting aside our biases. We work from strengths-based perspective, identifying behaviors that support healthy lifestyles. And that could be as simple as, and I shouldn't say it's simple, but that could be an example of setting an appointment. When someone calls, literally goes to pick up the phone, their cell phone, dial a number, talk with somebody on the line, schedule an appointment, and hang up the phone. That is a huge step, and we want to support that. When folks then actually follow through and come in for their intake, acknowledge that they're there, welcome them, make them feel like, yes, we want to see more of you, this place is for you, we're here to work with you. Those kinds of things. That's working from a strengths-based perspective. And certainly authenticity. Really being authentic and that personal connection helps build therapeutic relationships. I believe it's important to take time to establish a connection before any work can be done. Introductions are important. So in that, certainly making no assumptions regarding sexual behavior. I am guilty of this, I will disclose. Full disclosure, when I was doing intakes for a program, I would gloss over or sort of skip over questions around sexual behavior or risk behaviors, whether it be unprotected vaginal sex, unprotected anal sex, what have you. I would sort of gloss over those questions with clients who were, say, 50 and over or 65 and over. Because in my mind, I was thinking, well, they're not at risk, they're not engaging in those behaviors. There's no need to go there. But really, when you get down deeper into it, I was actually uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable, and that's why I didn't want to talk about it. So being mindful of examples such as that. And also making no assumptions regarding sexual orientation. I think in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter how people identify. What I'm most interested in is risk behaviors, and how can I help facilitate some change to reduce those risks, or facilitate some ways to incorporate healthier behaviors in their life. So looking at engagement and sort of further along the line of building trust, I think it's important to supply, if you can, nutritious snacks, being mindful of the high rates of diabetes with Native communities. And this may be the only nutritious snack of the day. Native people are at a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to all other races and ethnicities. And so, maybe apples in lieu of sugary cookies, or protein bars, or sugar-free juices, or something as a way to break bread and to build trust with communities. And if nothing else, it can be simple as offering a glass of water. Would you like a glass of water? Can I get you some water for you to drink? I mean, that's just sort of creating a engagement strategy. That's an engagement strategy. Another strategy might be meeting a place of their choice. This can create ease for the client. Consider outdoors, such as a park or another community if possible, being mindful of issues of transportation, after hours. Again, we are going to where the community is a much better approach to engaging and building trust than having them come to spaces that they're unfamiliar with or afraid of or intimidated by. And if possible, rearranging furniture. I mean, that's a simple strategy. Rather than sit behind a desk, bring the chair around and sit, face to face without any physical barriers in between you and the client. Certainly trying and aiming to affirm Native cultural heritage. One way to begin this process is to ask where they're from, ask where their family's from, ask about their what tribal community they identify with. Engaging any supportive family and or connections. Sometimes they may bring family with them to an appointment, asking if they'd like to sit in, asking with the client if they would like to have the family with them in the session. And another big area that I think is really critical when working in Native communities is incentives. I know in the HIV work that I've done, incentives play a huge role in getting folks tested for HIV. One, it eliminates the stigma in a sense. So someone can then say, oh, I don't really care about the results or the test. I'm just going in there to get the $10 Walmart card or the $10 gas card. And there's this larger question, the literature speaks to the client-provider relationship regarding incentives. Is the client seeking services only for the incentives? Or is the client personally motivated? There's a belief out there that we should not be paying people to take charge of their health. I think continue setting positive examples so that they'll return back for other needs and to address other issues. So I think it's just another strategy that works. Service providers certainly do, again, work from a positive service delivery model. Again, working from a strength-based approach. We convey authentic interest. We're mindful of that. We acknowledge and provide support for positive steps already made. Again, that phone call when folks schedule an intake, when folks come in for their follow-ups. I have a good friend of mine who likes to use this phrase, and I believe it. One way we can support and be encouraging of clients who return for the appointments is to actually say, people in care live longer and do better than those who are not in care. Reminding clients of that, I think, is important. And you all have a unique vantage point, and that you all can advocate from the frontline perspective. You all have your finger on the pulse of trends that you're seeing in the community, drug using trends, what are some of the challenges that folks identify in accessing services. I mean, so you all are all able to advocate from a unique perspective, and I encourage you all to do so. So again, building trust may require of us to challenge systems. Like, whose needs are being met? Again, where is your office located? Is it an area where community infrequently visits? We may then need to consider going out to the community as opposed to having them come to us. Are there complex organizational processes, barriers, steps to even getting into an appointment? What does your drop-in hours look like? Is that a process in and of itself? Do your intake forms reflect diverse clients? So on your intake forms, when it asks you to check a box whether you're male or female, are you being mindful of the transgendered folks? Believe it or not, that actually can be a barrier to transgender clients even wanting to come into your organization. If you're not affirming of their existence, why would they want to come in the first place? So asking these larger questions of your processes. So other barriers to solutions might be your own personal biases. Maybe you don't want to work with transgender clients. That's a bias. You may have limited referral resources in your community. I worked with a tribal health department that was really 100% on board with wanting to do HIV testing for their community, but wanted to wait before they implemented that until they actually had HIV specialists located nearby or in the surrounding communities that they could refer folks to. And that's, I think, a very enlightened way to think about things. So why test somebody now and perhaps get people who test positive for HIV and then have nowhere to refer them to? So that was something they took into account. I know that there are limitations to funding and limitations to staffing and limitations to incentives and challenges as such. So that's a barrier. Also, working with unrealistic timeframes and other programmatic, deliverable situations. In the next 6 months, you will have completed 600 unduplicated intakes for the small community you work in. In the next 6 months, you will have tested 300 Native individuals unduplicated in your community. I mean, those are really unrealistic challenges, unrealistic timeframes, and sometimes we have to work within those parameters. Another issue around building trust is certainly confidentiality. Issues of drug use, sexual behaviors rather, sexual identities, gender identities may be highly stigmatized within Native communities. So it's I think that goes for a lot of communities, not just Native communities. But there seems to be a lot of stigma, more so in Native communities, from my perspective. It is certainly critical we maintain the highest level of confidentiality if we're serious about improving the quality of life for all people. Native people may have a personal experience or have family members working within these local health centers, and there may have been breaches of confidentiality. So I would just want to talk about that for a moment. Breach of confidentiality, as it is described, is a disclosure of information to a third party without consent or a court order. A private information that the physician has learned or the provider has learned within the provider-client relationship. Disclosure can be oral or written, by telephone or fax, or electronically, such as through email, or health information networks. All right, so it's very, very serious. And that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about confidentiality. It's that trust piece, right? So thinking of trust as the central goal of what we're trying to achieve with clients, right? When we have trust with the clients we work with, we can actually get a complete health assessment. We're more likely to, I should say. People are more likely to disclose the reality of their situation. In that, we are able to respond with high quality health care, right? Specific needs are being met, and we're able to facilitate that process. Ultimately, reducing cost reductions. So people aren't in and out of care, they're more likely to stay in care, and reduce client referrals. So again, clients are more likely to stay in care and not want to be referred out. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about confidentiality in the next few slides. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions at the moment? I'll just take one or two before we move on. How
I'll just remind everyone, if you have questions, please type into the Q&A pod. It's just to the right of the presentation screen. If you put your presentation in full screen mode, you'll need to exit out of that in order to see the Q&A.
Great. Thank you. And please feel free to go ahead and type your questions if one comes up. Moving forward. So I'd like to talk about steps to engaging native clients. Now these are Matt Ignacio's unpatented steps, 5 steps to engaging native clients. And I put these together a few years back in thinking about, well, what would I tell somebody who had never worked with native populations or other vulnerable, marginalized communities, who had never worked with them? What might be some ways that folks may begin to engage those folks? So I always consider knowledge of native-centric worldviews, being mindful of that, understanding the roles or how Western medicine might be perceived by native communities. Excuse me. Looking at providing formal introductions and not minimizing that by any means, how important that is. Explaining confidentiality. So rather than just, I know that we all work from really high standards of protecting client confidentiality, but I would suggest going a step further, and we'll talk about that in step 4. And again, understanding the role of circular migration. So having, as a provider with limited knowledge of working with native clients, I would encourage those folks to begin to have a knowledge or understanding of native-centric worldviews. Many native people do not conceptualize themselves as most important. We might conceptualize the world based upon our membership to a community or tribal identity. So very often in a room of native people going around the room doing introductions, folks might say their name, but they're also going to identify their tribal affiliation, right? So they're signifying that they're part of a larger community, that they're not the only one, and to be respectful of other folks who might be from the same tribe in the room. That is part of not conceptualizing yourself as most important. And the self may be secondary to family and community. How many mothers out there would rush to get your children into care the minute they're sick, but let your symptoms go on and on and on for weeks before you take the time to take care of yourself? Similar to that. An important worldview I think to consider also is that family, the word family, can include others than just blood relatives. So in-laws, people of the same clan, distant relations, others in the community, adopted members. And that might be an important intake form consideration when asking about family, is to think about when folks say, when native folks hear the word family, they might think of not just the folks as the family of origin, the mother, father, and siblings or children, but the larger family. It might have a much broader definition. So in contrast, most medical models only focus on the individual for appropriate reasons. You break your arm, we're just going to talk to you and try to mend your arm. You get sick, we're just treating you and trying to get you better so you can, continue with life. Stigmatized health concerns can call attention to their family or community and create shame-based discrimination. Let me back up for a second. So looking at the individual, I have actually seen folks adhere to medication and treatment much better when the family is involved. So rather than looking at the individual and saying, take this medication twice a day for the rest of your life, really thinking about how the family can play a role in that process. There was a woman living in a really rural community in Colorado who was having a difficult time adhering to her HIV meds, and her health was fluctuating as a result of that, until she actually brought her kids in, who were probably 10, 12 years old, brought her kids in to her appointments. And what started happening was that the kids wanted to be a part of this and hung up a calendar on the wall and every time would check in if the mother took, Mom, did you take your medications? And if she did, they would mark that with an X on the calendar, so that way the kids knew that she took her meds, and that way the mother took her meds, and as a result, I mean, it was like night and day. The woman actually, her health condition improved. So I know that we focus on the individual, but I think what I'm trying to say is with Native clients, we might consider how to incorporate the family and the larger support system to improve health and wellness. And, again, the challenges that we're talking about, stigmatized health concerns such as HIV or addiction, or I'm trying to think of other stigmatized health concerns. They can certainly call attention to families and communities, and that can create a lot of shame and discrimination for that family, and it may not be an easy road for them. So I don't have an answer to that, but I'm just saying those are things to be mindful of. And really valuing the importance of modesty and nonverbal communication. This presentation is being delivered in a very linear fashion. So from point A to point B to point C to point D, right? In Native, ways of communication might be a little bit more a roundabout or not so direct, and just sort of being mindful and valuing that style. So looking at the role of Western medicine. For many Native people, Western medicine has ties to historic and traumatic experiences. So sterilization practices of Native women. The understandings of health and wellness and disease and sickness, come into play. Medical models and medical interventions in Western medicines can, for some clients, be tied to other non-Native traumas. So Reservation Acts, exploitation of natural resources, government relocation acts of the 1960s. When I said earlier that we as service providers represent institutions that have created harm in the past, it's important to be mindful of that. So when I say trust is important and building trust is important, I really, really, truly mean that. Also thinking about boarding school experiences and the quote on Indian education, to take the Indian out of the child and kill the Indian, save the man. I'm not rehashing history, but I just would encourage you to think that if folks aren't coming into care, or they seem distrustful, or they seem disengaged, it may have nothing. It may be because it had nothing to do with you, or it may have everything to do with you. I don't want to say that. What I want to say is, just be mindful that folks may have come with their own issues, and if there's a way to work through it, I applaud you. I think whenever I've encountered this, I've actually just named it. I've actually just said, it must be difficult for you to come in here to a place that, that has not treated your family well in the past, or because there have been times when families haven't been treated well in the past, or it might be difficult for you to come here because of what you've heard in the community or the gossip that you've heard about us as providers. Let's talk about it, and that might be a strategy to mitigate that. Step 3 is really providing formal introductions. Again, we're building trust. As Native people are accustomed to explaining their membership within a given community to other Natives, so when I introduce myself, I say my tribal affiliation, as you heard in the top of this presentation. It might be helpful for you to explain your role within the agency, where you kind of fall in line with the pecking order, as it were. Or it might be helpful to explain, your experience with the community, or if you're from there, if you're not from there, where you come from, kind of give some context about who you are. And if you've worked with other Native communities, I think those are all ways to place you into the larger world for Native clients. Again, it's important to take time to establish a connection before titles up front and proud. And when Kate talks about my background and my title and my roles and my achievements, it does make me feel a little uncomfortable, only because I don't I don't ever see myself as any of that, and I don't ever think of that stuff. And I don't think Native clients really they don't really care, and I'm not making a generalization, but it might be helpful to put all that stuff off to the side and really just have a human-to-human interaction. And that could be true for many communities, not just Native communities. Okay, so for Native clients, I think shaking hands is necessary. Small talk is a great way to gather information about the client. You're building rapport, you're building a relationship, you're building a connection. And here's the part about confidentiality, going that step further, explaining confidentiality. We've already pointed out that there can be distrust between you as a provider and the folks you work with. So we talked about how there's this wariness of Western medicine, and there may be a personal connection. There may be somebody, so if you're sitting across from a client, they may actually be related to somebody working in that facility. So I like to take it a step further. It might be helpful to explain the process step by step of what confidentiality looks like at your facility, at your organization. So here at our office, we have double-locked client charts. There is limited access to those charts, and if that access is breached, or if people have access to those charts that are not authorized, there are liabilities, and that we take confidentiality very serious. So that's an example, really kind of describing the process. It might be helpful to explain who and who does not have access to those charts. So folks who, on a need-to-know basis, have access, right? Who is that in the organization? Who might be? In what situations would information be shared? And fully explain reasons why you would need to report. So when folks identify self-harm or harm to others, or child or elder abuse, really explaining what that means and why you would need to share information with authorities. So again, I know we work from high standards of respecting confidentiality and upholding confidentiality. I just think it's helpful to explain it a little further and what that means. All right, step 5 is understanding circular migration. As I said earlier, many Native people travel daily, weekly, monthly, or annually to reservation communities, to and from reservation urban areas for various reasons. We know that folks living in the city may go back home for ceremony, etc. Well, this can certainly be a challenge to treatment plan adherence. And as a result, a Native person might be labeled as resistant or non-compliant or hard to reach or unmotivated. And it's important to understand that actually may not be the case. They may actually have had to return back home to take care of a dying family member. So, my suggestion might be to withhold labeling and judgment, because I think once we begin to label and judge clients, it shifts our approach in how we work with them. And I'll speak for myself. I have to be very mindful of that and to not listen to when other people are passing judgment, and to be able to separate my own practice from other people's opinions and assessments. Let's talk about supervision, whether it be administrative supervision, evaluative supervision, or clinical supervision. I think it's a luxury this day and age to get any supervision. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen a lot, but I think it doesn't happen a lot. So consulting with your supervisor can be a component of decision making. So what do you do now? Now that you have, life is messy, client's life is, they're in a situation, where do you go from here? Certainly a supervisor can help facilitate decision making. As I said, it may not always be available, it may not always be helpful. And I think the point of all this is to underscore it is your ethical obligation to seek clinical supervision or supervision and not work under case evaluation only. So Three goals of an effective supervisor are really to assure delivery of quality treatment and services, create a positive work environment, and develop staff skills. Those are very general overarching. Effective supervisors in a timely manner. Effective supervisors needed skills. They provide supportive and respectful environment, and they lead by, I don't know you, but it really is. And even when you don't have effective supervision, there's still going on for you as a provider. You're seeing what may work for you or what doesn't work for you, and that's all great insight moving forward. You know, and when we don't get the best, when we don't have the best working environments, or it's not, you know, when we are challenged with our jobs, you know, that can certainly lead to stress. I know none of you have experienced stress in your day-to-day jobs, right? Right. So stress begins with a life situation that knocks you out of balance. When life situations are perceived and cognitively appraised as distressing emotional reactions, such as fear, anger, insecurity, develop, leading to physiological arousal, illness, and disease. So in other words, when there's a situation that you have deemed horrible, disastrous, crisis, your body is having a reaction to that, even just by talking about it. So, looking from a biological perspective, you know, stress affects certainly the brain, the muscles, your skin, limbic, emotions, and endocrine glands, hormones, expending and conserving energy, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal. I mean, there's a biological response to stress, right? So people might complain of back pain or shoulder pain, headaches, migraines. There's a psychological effect from stress, which are your thoughts and feelings. And certainly sociological, surrounding environment responses to stress. Some of the symptoms, as we know, as we all know, are certainly skipping or changes in our eating pattern. Certainly working more and taking breaks less. Physical changes in your job performance, that's key. Self-medicating, whether it be through drugs and alcohol, whether it be through shopping, whether it be through eating, etc., etc. Again, changes in your sleep, emotional changes, and many, many others. And when there's too much stress in your life, it can certainly lead to burnout. And burnout is defined as an emotional exhaustion in which the professional no longer has any positive feeling, sympathy, or respect for clients. We don't want to see this happen, right? We want to prevent this from happening. Any adverse work stress reaction with psychological, physiological, and behavioral components often associate, again, with stress, fatigue, frustration, and apathy. So there's some stages. Just be mindful of this. We're looking at when we first start out in our jobs as the honeymoon phase. We're very satisfied. We may move on to a fuel shortage. Fatigue might start to set in. Then we might start to see chronic symptoms, physical effects, like we're losing sleep, or we're sleeping too much, or we're stress eating. Then we move into more of a crisis phase where an actual illness can develop. So you get migraines, you get colds, you're actually having physical body pains. And what we want to avoid is hitting the where there is a complete breakdown. Severe enough, and can be severe enough to cause illness that is life-threatening. Right? We don't want to see that. So I'll just say this, simply put, for sustained, unmanageable, painful stress, in essence, your response is your responsibility. So if you are in any of those stages of working towards burnout, which I hope you're not, seek help, whatever that means to you. If that means talking with your supervisor, sometimes the source of our problems might be through our supervisors. So maybe with just talking with a colleague or further along the but let folks know what's going on. I think that's important. Certainly setting limits of what you will and can. If you're scheduled Monday through Friday, really take Saturday and Sunday off from work. Really don't, really your time away from work to create some boundaries there. Manage your symptoms. If you are ill, if you have a recurring cold, if you have migraines, get to a doctor, talk to a doctor about this. And, it might be worthwhile to explore new interests, new areas, new challenges within your work. So, in all of my experience, which spans about 16 years now, I've never just done one thing. And I've diversified what I've done in the field of HIV, in the global industry of HIV. So keeping a fresh perspective and new ways of looking at your work is one way to manage stress. Some ways we can combat stress management certainly is through humor, certainly is through meditation, ceremonies, prayer and spirituality, volunteering, relaxation techniques, exercise. So one example is, if you work in an office culture, might be to get a Fitbit. And I don't know if you know what Fitbit is, but it tracks, I don't work for Fitbit, so I'm not endorsing their product, but it tracks your steps. And so I know it's kind of fun to compare with your office mates to see how many steps they've taken for the day and vice versa, and then challenge yourself and each other to get out and get some walking in on your breaks. It might be a good way to incorporate some activity in your life. I want to thank you so much for spending your questions or comments. We will take them now.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was a wonderful presentation, and just a lot of great insight on, especially how to connect through cultural openness and just invite those kind of things into our work with clients. So thank you so much, and I'll just encourage everyone to submit additional questions now. And while we're waiting for those, I'll just put up real quickly the slide of some of our upcoming webinars. Can hours, which will include the CEH request form, and it'll also include a link to the survey in case you aren't redirected right after we finish out here. And it'll also include handouts of today's webinar. So look for those things to come tomorrow. And let me just go back to Matt's screen here. So if you wanted to get down his information, you can do that. And yeah, someone mentioned not being able to download the CEH request form. So don't worry about that. That will be sent to you in the follow-up email as an attachment. So I don't see any other questions at the moment. Matt, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share before we close out?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I hope that was helpful for those of you who might be newer to your profession. I hope this provided some food for thought and some things to consider. And for those of you who are more seasoned and more veteran in your work, perhaps it was a helpful reminder of strategies and some of the things that we do and the work that we do. So I hope it was helpful, and please feel free to reach out. If you have any other questions, you have my contact information, and I wish you all really, really well in the work that you do. Please keep it up. Thank you.
Great, and thanks so much for those comments, and I'm glad people enjoyed the webinar today, and I just am so grateful to Matt for coming on and for presenting this. So with that, I'll thank everyone for joining us, and we'll go ahead and close out here. So have a great day.